This video is intended to conclude parts 1 and 2 of the real golden trout of Volcano Creek. I recently started publishing some articles in a local fly fishing club newsletter with the aim of providing additional context and information on the videos. The real benefit of this has been receiving some great feedback, which really forces me to clarify my thinking on these topics. The second article took about 2 months to complete. Due to the pushback I received, it forced me to go back through all the stuff I had read years ago and really clarify my thinking on these topics. Although this process can be upsetting and time consuming, especially for someone like me who spends a lot of time stressing over the word choice and order of the words when I write, I've come to appreciate the incredible value in this whole process. I spend a lot of time in my own head locked in certain modes of thinking, and it's easy to really deceive yourself into thinking you know more than you know. And I think that it's only through putting those thoughts down on paper, organizing those thoughts, clarifying them, sending them out into the world, that you can kind of combat the self-deception a little bit and start developing a relationship with the slippery concept that is the truth. So if you'd like to keep up on these articles, I'll be publishing them on the website, gofishingoften.com/Heritage Trout Archives, and you can sign up for Fisher Fridays to be notified upon release. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy Death of the Most Beautiful of Trouts. My interest in the golden trout of Volcano Creek began during a discussion with an old sage of a fly fisher. Having a gift for narrative, Steve started discussing how every year anglers from all over the world set out to catch a Volcano Creek golden trout. The only problem was they were targeting the wrong creek. "What do you mean by the wrong creek?" I asked. Steve explained. In a 1905 report titled "The Golden Trout of the Southern High Sierras," Everman described the most beautiful of all trout, the Volcano Creek golden, as occupying only one creek, Volcano Creek. The problem is early maps referenced this creek under two names, Golden Trout Creek and Volcano Creek. For whatever reason, the name Golden Trout Creek stuck, but we still refer to the trout as Volcano Golden Trout. And if that wasn't confusing enough, CDFW put out a drought report a few years ago on Volcanic Creek, which is a small Volcano/Golden Trout Creek tributary. So people walk past Volcano Creek every year in search of tiny Volcanic Creek. That's interesting, I said. I've heard them referred to as Volcano Goldens before, but I hadn't put too much thought into it. I mean, there's golden trout all over the golden trout wilderness. Other than a slight variation with the little kern golden, they're all basically the same. Well, Everman would disagree with you, Steve said. The report does list 4 different subspecies of goldens: the little kern golden, the South Fork golden, the golden trout of Volcano Creek, and the Kern River rainbow. My drive home that night was one of humble contemplation. I had spent most of my youth hiking and fishing in the golden trout wilderness. Steve had made me realize how vague my understanding of the topography and taxonomy was. I was both excited by this new insight and disappointed in my ignorance. I spent the next few weeks reading as much as possible on the topics. During this time, the idea of producing videos started materializing, based on a couple of thoughts. First, the stream name confusion was a problem. Someone needed to help sort through it. Second, I had already started the Heritage Trout Challenge. With 2 out of 6 trout caught, I was having the time of my life researching and catching each subspecies, so I could document my progress through the challenge and share what I was learning. If I found this stuff interesting and useful, someone else may too. And so began Heritage Trout Mapping. Armed with a couple of GoPros, I set off in search of the real golden trout of Volcano Creek. The story continues in part 2. Part 2. Anticipation built as we began our windy 6,000-foot ascent up Horseshoe Meadows Road to the Cottonwood Pass trailhead. We planned to take the trail pass route following the South Fork of the Kern into Tunnel Meadows. Camping here would allow us to be within walking distance of the South Fork of the Kern and Golden Trout Creek. On day 2, we would follow Golden Trout Creek to Big Whitney Meadows and loop back to our starting point through Cottonwood Pass. After climbing Trail Pass, we descended to Mulkey Creek, our first point of interest. Mulkey Creek is a tributary to the South Fork of the Kern and marks the first reported stocking of golden trout. Goldens taken from Mulkey Creek were stocked into Cottonwood Creek. From here, they were later transplanted into the historically fishless Cottonwood Lakes. Mulkey Creek proved to be some of the most exciting fishing on the trip. This was due to an insane grasshopper hatch we stumbled into upon entering the meadow. After tying on a small foam hopper pattern, I hooked up with the first golden of the trip, which launched like a torpedo across a small creek, bringing a healthy arc to my tenkara rod and only succumbing to net after an exciting final dance across the water's surface. After catching and documenting a few more Mulkey Creek Goldens, we waved goodbye to Mulkey Creek and started on the next phase of our trip. At this point, the trail meets up and parallels with the South Fork of the Kern. Every little pool along the trail supported 1 to 2 little South Fork Goldens. I captured a few trout on video, but did not stop for a hook and line sampling due to my excitement to reach the famous Volcano Creek. An old guard station marks the entrance to Tunnel Meadows and lies past a tunnel created in the 1880s. The tunnel's purpose was to divert water from Golden Trout Creek to the South Fork of the Kern. The water diversion was destined for failure, with the tunnel caving in soon after construction. It then transformed into an open cut that soon caved in as well. Efforts were abandoned at this site, and a diversion about 1.5 miles above was attempted again. By Mr. Everman's return in 1905, both diversion sites were closed and thought to have been so since 1899. Mr. Everman believed that the diversions allowed trout to escape from Golden Trout Creek and to the South Fork of the Kern, but did not allow trout to migrate in the other direction. We set up camp on a ridge separating both creeks and began working the banks of Volcano Creek. After I caught and released a few Volcano Creek Goldens, lost then found one of my cameras, we ended the day with a mountain house meal, followed by a late night discussion of the fishing and trout characteristics observed. The trout we were searching for was Samo roosevelti, the golden trout of Volcano Creek. It was a new species described by Everman in 1904 and proclaimed the most beautiful of all trouts. Our plan was to use the color plates and descriptions from Everman's publication to help identify the Volcano Creek Golden. The most notable difference is a lack of spots above the lateral line in the Volcano Creek Golden. The second day brought a rejuvenated excitement. We spent time fishing both streams before packing up and starting the last leg of our journey. At this point, we observed a considerable variation in characteristics from both streams, but we had caught trout true to the descriptions and the color plates. Pictures of color plates, trout, somewhere in there, I don't know. Mid-morning, we began our ascent following Golden Trout Creek to Big Whitney Meadows. We stopped to fish about a mile outside of Big Whitney Meadow. Almost every trout caught from this point on met the Volcano Golden's high standard of beauty, as described by Mr. Everman. The trend continued through Big Whitney Meadow until fatigue drove the conclusion of the fishing part of our trip. With headlamps in place to cut a descending blanket of darkness, we began our hike back to the truck. I know this will not be my last journey to Volcano Creek. Besides marking some of the most beautiful trout and topography I've seen, the trip has inspired new questions and revealed additional threads left to unravel in the story of the golden trout of Volcano Creek. Afterward, death of the most beautiful of trouts. It is with some regret that I attempt to close this article with a few citations from the literature. I tried to omit this part in my original drafts, knowing that if I continued with my current interests and pursuits, I would one day have to confront this information. But after review, it became clear that the article only added to the confusion surrounding the Volcano Creek golden trout. And only through careful examination of the information could we further the discussions around this topic. Here we go. In 1911, David Starr Jordan wrote a letter to William E. Colby, president of the Sierra Club. Quote, he was unable to see how the species of Everman, Samo roosevelti, differs from the original Samo agua bonita. In 1933, Brian Curtis conducted the second scientific study on the golden trout. Mr. Curtis spent 3 months working in the Cottonwood Lakes Basin. In his unpublished thesis, The Golden Trout of Cottonwood Lakes, he concluded, quote, from all evidence available, the fish known as Samo roosevelti Everman is not a distinct species, but a color variation of S. agua bonita Jordan. In 1971, Carl B. Schreck and Robert J. Benke later expanded upon these observations in their paper, Trouts of the Upper Kern River Basin, California, with reference to systematics and evolution of Western North American Samo. Quote, stating that S. roosevelti and S. A. agua bonita are similar and the former should be considered a synonym for the latter. The paper went on to state, Quote, "The color plate of S. roosevelti, published by Everman in 1906, is an accurate representation of the color pattern of a typical S.A. agua bonita." Quote, "Despite Everman's opinion, there are no consistent differences in spot distribution between S. roosevelti and S.A. agua bonita." This would lead one to conclude that the golden trout of Volcano Creek, Samo roosevelti Everman, never existed. It was only the proclamation of one passionate man in 1906. Today, the most accepted scientific name for trout of the South Fork of the Kern and Golden Trout Creek is Oncorhynchus mykiss agua bonita. It would seem that this debate was settled shortly after discovery. Why then do we continue to revisit a documented inconsistent variation in color and spotting patterns? From updated taxonomic methods to modern genetic analysis, is it the relentless search for truth or the mark of the insane to continue a search for something that was never really there to begin with? A rational mind could point to the latter, and I too would have believed this, if not for my adventures to Volcano Creek in search of the most beautiful of trouts. For it was here, walking in the same steps as Everman, that I was confronted with the same animating spirit of enthusiasm known only to the observant angler immersed in sport and surrounded by the enchantress that is the natural world, that I found what I was searching for. For what is beauty but a few minor variations in the typical?